Mr. Cicilline.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here. And just in case there's any mystery about why you're not being allowed to answer questions by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, or why they're not interested in your reference to data or misleading statements or making statements which are inaccurate that you've corrected for them, well, it's actually, there's a plan about this. They're not actually interested in that because they have a 60-page memo prepared by the ranking member of this committee, as reported it in the newspaper. That's a memo that includes misleading and provocative talking points that seek to portray migrants and refugees as perpetrators of gruesome crimes. It's a confidential for internal use only document, and it's prepared so that the Republicans can argue that Democrats are seeking to, listen to this, abolish all immigration enforcement and even encourage illegal immigration. So don't be confused, with all due respect, Mr. Secretary, of your ongoing effort to actually put data and information for the committee. There's a whole plan about what this hearing's about, and it's about creating Fox News spots that they can use for politics. And I regret that you have to be part of it, but I'm grateful for your presence here today. And so I have three very specific questions. In addition to wanting to express my gratitude for all that you're doing, that video that was, again, designed to be scary showed you're preventing dangerous individuals from coming into the United States, arresting drug kingpins, seizing caches of drugs, and disrupting human trafficking. Sounds like you're doing exactly what we expect you and your department to do, and for that, we're grateful. First question is, there have been a number of very anti-LGBT laws passed around the country that have put families, and particularly parents, at risk. In Texas, for example, an executive order that demanded the investigation of parents for providing their trans children with health care, a position supported by every medical association. In response, the United States Air Force has announced it will provide legal, medical, and other resources to employees whose families are impacted by these anti-LGBTQ laws, including reassignments to other states if necessary. And my question, Mr. Secretary, is will you commit to providing similar resources to DHS employees whose families are impacted by these anti-LGBTQ laws?
Congressman, let me, if I can, make a very important statement. Diversity, equity, inclusion, opportunity is one of our core principles. It is one of our priorities for fiscal year 22 and beyond. We're investing in employee well-being and employee morale.
And thank you, and I hope you will look at the practices that the United States Air Force has adopted and consider doing exactly the same thing. Mr. Secretary, last week you announced a new streamlined process for Ukrainians to enter the United States through humanitarian parole and the refugee program, and of course this is very much needed. Can you discuss the actions you're taking in order to ensure that we reach this 100,000 number, and also what can Congress do to support it? And if you could do that quickly, I have one last question.
Very quickly, as I mentioned previously, we have the Uniting for Ukraine program, which is a humanitarian parole program. We've already received, I believe, more than 4,000 applications, and we launched the program on Monday. We also deployed our refugee affairs officers to the region to accept refugee applications, and so we are going full throttle to realize the President's commitment to provide refugee relief for 100,000 Ukrainians.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And finally, our nation's refugee and asylum programs were once called by the evangelical leadership of this country as the crown jewel of America's humanitarian work. But as you know, Mr. Secretary, the prior administration, the Trump administration, dismantled our refugee admissions program and set historically low refugee admission goals. They decimated the capacity of refugee resettlement organizations and delayed the pipeline of refugees ready for processing in the United States. Fortunately, President Biden has begun to reverse that process. Can you discuss what your department is doing to increase our nation's ability to accept and resettle refugees? Why have the refugee admission numbers been so low even this year? And what can Congress do to support our refugee program to ensure that America continues to be the kind of crown jewel of the refugee and asylum program that other people around the world look to as an example of what a great humanitarian effort is?
Congressman, thank you so much for your interest in these critical programs, and we were and are so proud to once again lead the world in doing so. We are hiring personnel so that our personnel can administer applications for refugee status and can administer applications for asylum. And one of the requests in the President's fiscal year 2023 budget is to appropriate funds to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services so that we can advance the recruitment and hiring efforts. We will, of course, promulgate a fee rule that will equip USCIS with additional resources to hire those personnel, which are so vital. The work they do is so incredibly noble.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for your service to our country. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.